Hi, and welcome to a discussion on the Somnium Files, developed and published by Chunsoft. A lot of you may not have heard of the wonderful crime mystery, dream-travelling, future tech-filled masterpiece that is the Somnium Files. Despite it receiving decent reviews overall, it is a game I hear shockingly little about. This is commonplace in the competitive gaming industry. I'm mostly shocked to see little talk about this game or its upcoming sequel because of the fact that Chunsoft developed and published this game. Chunsoft are the developers of the well-known game Danganronpa. The fanbase for this game is quite large and considerably toxic, but that doesn't take away from how good the games are and how well loved they are. People are so desperate for a new Danganronpa game that there are many fan games in the works at any given time. For this reason, I'm shocked the Somnium Files have not been swept up by this fanbase and loved in the same way, because even though the lead developers on both games are different people, the actual games themselves have a lot in common. It kind of makes sense that the games would have similar feels due to the fact that these guys work down the hall from one another, but the games are definitely not copy and pasted and should be considered in their own individual spotlight. The Somnium Files is a shared experience with the characters, a story filled with dead ends, disappointments, and glorious complications. It is a game that blends video games with storytelling perfectly and actually manages to pull off time travel as a plot point, which has never been done before as far as I'm concerned. It has many themes, many characters, and many endings as any visual novel would, and yet it steps out of the realm of visual novel standards and onto the stage of greatness. It goes without saying that this video will contain spoilers, so if you want to play the game, I highly recommend you do so. Throughout the game, we follow Detective Kaname Date, a man with one regular eye and another eye that contains a complex AI that helps him solve crimes. He is also able to use a device called a sync machine that allows him to access other people's dreams and thoughts, but only when sitting in this big thing with them. These two devices are almost the only futuristic things that are found throughout the game. It's a very strange situation to find yourself in as a player, and it messes with your perception of the world. It makes the setting more high-tech than our own world, but only just, and because of this, it makes you think that if robot eyes that talk to you are possible, what else is? The game putting you in this what-if mindset is possibly the strongest tool in its arsenal, as it makes what otherwise would be clear indicators and hints false positives, and lulls you into a state of overthinking, allowing the story to get away with far more twists than any story should. As you play through this game, you have to play through multiple endings to get the true ending. This might sound familiar to those of you that have played visual novels in the past. You need to continuously play through the game, most of the situations being the same, but the odd scene being different enough to keep you interested. But the Somnium Files does this differently, harder in fact than other games do, as when you play through different routes, there aren't just small differences to the story, but whole other timelines. The whole game changes depending on the route you go down, and some routes are locked until you've completed others. It's interesting, because though each of these routes are completely different, they all interlink and are all necessary to finish the game. It makes it seem like all these timelines are linked up. We get confirmation from Date that he remembers things from previous routes that should technically have never happened, confirming that this is the case. Because of the mixture of this convoluted semi-timeline travelling storyline, and the mentality that I was in, where I wasn't sure what was possible in this slightly futuristic world, the game ends up being a constant think piece. There were many twists in the game that I struggled to believe, but it was because I was constantly trying to think around every plot point. This might sound pretty heavy, but the characters in the game really carry the story. Date is an incredibly interesting character. He clearly cares a lot about his job and the people around him, but due to a mystery injury he only has memories of the last 6 years, leading him to often being confused by the world. Narratively, this allows the characters to explain things to Date that most other people in the game world already know, but it also allows for a blank slate sort of character. Yes, Date does have character. He likes adult magazines and for the most part doing the right thing, but he is far less rounded than anyone else in the story, and considering he only has experiences dating back the last 6 years, that makes complete sense. Date is also a cop, but not one of the bad ones, and he works for a secret agency that isn't yet known by the public, leading to him being a little secretive about his profession with others. At least up until they ask him more than once. This man gives up government secrets far too easy for a trained officer. Iber, the AI living in his artificial eye, is constantly reminding him of how to act and what things are, and also says things like, "I need to up your dosage," though why we are being dosed we do not find out until much later. Aiba is cute in both forms, and far more sarcastic and cheeky than any AI ought to be. She constantly berates Date in a kind of loving way and uses the "I am a robot, I only understand logic" excuse to get out of awkward situations. These two make a great team. They're always on point when investigating, but when they are off the case and we get time for character development, they really make a delightful duo. They bounce off each other perfectly, and the dialogue is easy and enjoyable to read if you don't want to listen to the somewhat insufferable English voiceovers. We meet with many people as we play through the many stories, of which 3 are important enough to mention here. Mizuki Okiura is a young girl whose mother is the first death in the series, leading to the rest of the branching stories. She lives with Date and is strangely strong, so strong in fact she is capable of punching down trees. It seems impossible, but as I said, the game gets you thinking about what is possible and what isn't. She is brilliant, full of attitude, and bounces off Date almost as well as Aiba does. She plays a large part in the story, acting as an anchor for Date. Everything he does leads back to her. He clearly feels a sense of duty because of his job, but it seems that he only cares so much about this case because it affects Mizuki. There's also Oda, who I, as anyone should, really dislike. He's a seedy, lying, manipulative, spoiled brat of a hickey neat. He's awful to his mother, and his selfishness knows no limits. He is in love with the idol Aset, and although he will do a lot for her in an attempt to keep her safe, he is pretty awful to everyone else throughout the story. Clearly he is unlikable, but I think he's supposed to be unlikable, so good job to Kotaro Uchikushi on the character design. Aset, also known by her real name Iris Sagan, is an internet idol who streams video games online and is designed to look like what many 50-year-old developers who have never met a teenage girl think teenage girls look like. She's recently started making music and has been picked up by talent agency Lemniscent, which just so happens to be owned by Mizuki's dad. Iris is precious, but sometimes comes across like she has a death wish, which we find out she kind of has a reason for. Though this means she's a little bit reckless, it doesn't kill her spirit as she continuously remains to be a kind and charming personality in the story. These characters, along with many more, tangle and twist their stories together. Everyone knows everyone, and everyone is involved in everyone's business. Date is investigating murders, but it feels like for a lot of the game he's trying to figure out who is and who isn't lying about who and what they do. And as the player, right there beside him, I found myself doing the opposite of what I do in real life. I talked to people. I went through every single dialogue option available to me, trying to get every nugget of lore I could dig out of this story, and there are a lot of lines of dialogue. I even got the achievement for asking a police officer his name 50 times, just in case there was something important after asking his name 50 times. Spoilers, there isn't. I want to talk about the experience I felt whilst I played through the game as a whole, but I won't spoil too much, so there's still a little surprise for those of you who want to play the game after the review. As I played through this game, in the pitch dark of my living room, noise cancelling headphones resting on my ears, I immersed myself into the Somnium Files. I played for 14 hours at a time sometimes. Through dry eyes, I continued needing to know what would be the next step in the story. What would be the next twist? On my new monitor, I got absorbed in Date's case, unable to take my eyes off the screen. There was always something new to worry about, and this game injected urgency into my arm like it was a cure for everything. I rarely even thought about my actual life whilst I played through this game, and when I wasn't playing the game, I was thinking about playing the game. I had that feeling that I'm sure many of you have had, of being excited to play a video game. I think that a lot of games that come out of modern times I play simply because I am supposed to, or it has characters that I like in it. But the game itself often feels little more than a chore. It is rare in the year 2021 that I play a game that actually makes me want to play video games. The main narrative of the game is us trying to figure out who the serial killer is. They seem to be a copycat killer, copying a serial killer from 6 years ago who would kill women and take their right eye. These old murders are first made to feel irrelevant, but also we are clearly left in the dark for some reason. As we play through the different stories, we sometimes find out more about these kills, and sometimes find out more about the current murders. Everyone in this story feels involved in these crimes in some way, shape or form, but not guilty of them. The story does a wonderful job of making sure that no situation is too heavy for too long. I think this might bother some people, but the game has a habit of pointing fun at and making a serious situation goofy. There are pervy jokes and shouting, and some of the jokes come across as lol random, which is a bit hard to swallow. Thankfully, these poorly landing jokes are few and far between, and I think once you have a chance to adapt to the game's very anime comedy style, I think you will have as much fun as I did. There's one part of the game where they have armed mercenaries who were hours ago hunting you down, dancing to an idle pop song. It sounds cheesy, but it was so out of the blue it took me off guard and at least made me smile. The serious moments are stomach churning. There are moments in the game where I was too scared to visit a location, and this is a feeling that I had a lot. There were many moments in the game where I was too scared to visit a location. The idea that just behind the next door was something horrible waiting, or a favourite character dead. I would sometimes avoid going to locations just because I was worried I would find something I didn't want to see. And when you saw the horrid scenes, it didn't feel grotesque, it felt sad. Because you get to know these characters either directly or through secondhand storytelling, when you see them suffer or you see them gone, it hurts. I found myself praying that I wasn't in the last timeline many times, just because I wanted characters to not be dead. Because you really do start to care for them. As you get to the end of the game, you end up realising that some of the people aren't as villainous as they originally seemed. You see people die in far sadder ways than you are initially led to believe. You even arrest the wrong people many times, only to find out by linking up with their brains that they are aware of much more than they are aware of. Piecing together this mammoth puzzle of storylines, world and character personalities is great fun but not necessary. I think many people could play this game and just play it and get to the end and have a good time. But if you want to try and figure out things ahead of time, you are given ammunition to do so, and it is very rewarding, even if you get it completely wrong. The actual gameplay is nothing to write home about. It's a lot of clicking this and clicking that. During the dream sequences, you can walk around as Aiba and interact with things, but it is really basically just more clicking. But the options you choose actually decide the direction of the route you go down, and you can fail. Like me, I failed a lot of these parts of the game, but if you are better at games than me, which I'm sure you are, you shouldn't have an issue. The choice in these sequences does give something for the completionists of you, as there's many achievements to get, some of which involve hunting for options that you wouldn't otherwise think of. This isn't only good for 100%ing the game, as the hunt for these options can often be funny and entertaining. Let's talk about the song for a moment. The song is terrible, but also great. Every time it played, it became more and more important to the story, and therefore I had a larger emotional connection with it. It wasn't the best song in the world. The English version is really terrible, but it becomes important as you play. And when the final dance number, yes, there's a final dance number in this game, comes along, you get those nice goosebumpy tingles. There is something that I want to point out. No matter how much I dislike this song, it still makes me tear up every time, because it makes me think of the long story I experienced with the many characters that I came to love. It makes me think of all that I overcame, and this is the mark of a genuinely wonderful experience. I am a musician. I've played in a few albums and I've made a few of my own. And at the end of my final project at university, an album with many songs spanning many genres, I cried listening to it back. And I did the same and felt the same overwhelming tears in my eyes playing through the Somnium Files and listening to this absolutely terrible song. The setting of the story is, as I said before, somewhere slightly more futuristic than the technology we have, but it feels somewhat cyberpunk. As Date drives around in an old car with a robot eye talking to him, helping Date solve crimes, even to an extent learning to love this robot eyeball AI, there is something that just feels very cyberpunk, futuristic and yet not. It's obviously not as cyberpunk as the game Cyberpunk, but something about it gives me that feeling. There are scenes where Date uses Aiba to become basically superhuman in combat. It makes him feel all-powerful. It made me wonder why we can't blast our way through every situation. Turns out, sometimes you can, and it's effective. But this wouldn't be possible. In fact, the whole setting of the game wouldn't be possible if we didn't have this only slightly high-tech reality. People still use social media. People still do podcasts. There's no virtual reality metaverse, it's all pretty normal, except for Date. He can hack computers with his mind. He can tell if people are lying by sensing their body heat. He can even look through people with X-ray vision to see their lovely, lovely bones. He is superhuman. And so is maybe Mizuki, because she literally fights hordes of grown men with guns and comes out with little more than a flesh wound. But Date is only exceptional because of Aiba, and Aiba only works in the head of Date. If I had to call the setting anything, I would say it's the beginning of cyberpunk. We are playing the man who is extending the frontier of machine and man, with externally inflicted experiments intended to fight crime. He is a man who will one day be looked back on as the beginning of the end of humanity as being separate from technology, and the beginning of artificial intelligence being recognized as a person. I know this might sound a little over the top, but this was my favourite aspect of the game. The fact that the technology felt so new to the characters, but believable. And with that ever-present feeling of not knowing what is real and what isn't, I half expected Aiba to be a figment of our imagination as I played through the game. Then again, maybe she was. Now for all of you that don't care about spoilers, I want to talk about each of the normal endings of the game, because endings are obviously a hugely important part of the game, but some are far better than others. There are technically many endings in the Somnium Files. There are many game over screens where Date dies and the game is, well, obviously over. There are many joke endings as well, which involve Date going on dates with well-endowed secretaries. But I won't be talking about these endings, as they are a dime a dozen. I want to talk about what is called the normal endings. During my playthrough, the first pathway that I ended up getting to was a dead end, as I needed to complete other endings to be able to continue and actually finish the storyline. This may have affected my experience of the game. I can imagine that if you play through the game experiencing each storyline as you are intended to, the story feels a lot more straightforward and smooth. I played one route, then the next one was also a dead end, and eventually I ended up getting the Oda ending, which is what I'm going to talk about now. In the Oda ending, Iris and Oda are kidnapped and nearly murdered by someone we assume to be the new Cyclops killer, the copycat killer I referred to previously. However, the ending revolves mostly around Oda's family. It revolves around Date assuming that Oda or his mother had something to do with Iris's attempted murder. Throughout the story, we know that Oda sock puppets accounts to defend Iris on social media. Doing this in real life by simultaneously being the killer and the defender is not out of the question for his character. However, it turns out that Oda's mother has Alzheimer's, and the only thing we find out with this ending is that Oda is a horrible son, a far more selfish person than we are initially made to believe, and is ultimately supposed to be redeemed by being nice to his mother in the end. As you can tell, this story seems a little out of the blue. It's nice to get to know more about these characters, and during the investigation I really thought Oda was the killer, but in the end it only confirmed to me that Oda is a bad person. A good character, but a bad person. I dislike him for many reasons, but these reasons are given, I think, so that we end up disliking Oda anyway. If you get to this conclusion, you are more than welcome to stop playing, and that can simply be your unfulfilled ending, leaving you with no information about the new Cyclops killer. But it is, in itself, an ending to a story. But I have no doubt you, as I did, will continue playing through the game to find out more. This ending is necessary to care about Oda on some microscopic level so that the other endings have more emotional impact, but it is my least favourite. Oda and Mizuki have a sketchy relationship that gets sketchier the more you learn, but aside from her poor choice in friends, Mizuki is a brilliant character, and has an incredibly enjoyable and important ending. Date comes to think that the new Cyclops killer is a local government figure. The investigation is shut down when he figures this out because shocker, the government is corrupt. And in a rage, Date storms the politician's mansion to get some good old-fashioned gun-blasting revenge. Mizuki comes with him, they both kick ass, all goes well, until Date gets shot in the head. But don't worry, he gets saved by Aiba, his robot eye. This might seem like the end of the timeline, but it actually goes on to tackle the relationship between Date and Mizuki. They really love each other. They are not blood family, but they are closer than that. They will literally sacrifice their lives to save each other, and when Mizuki finds out Date survives, she jumps to give him a hug, or maybe a punch. It's a sweet part of the story, and it's completely necessary to understand that Mizuki is basically Date's adoptive daughter. He loves her more than anything, and he wants to protect her and to an extent get revenge on the killer of her parents. Even though her parents are abusive, useless millionaires, their deaths hurt Mizuki, and so Date has a drive to bring those crimes to a resolution. I am soon to be a father, and this storyline made me feel a father's love that I expect to feel for my own child. You really come to feel like the protector of Mizuki. I felt urgency when she was held hostage. I felt panic every time I left her alone. I wanted to make sure she was safe because in a way she is the innocence of this story and Date, even though she beats people up with a metal pipe. Though this ending is emotionally fantastic, it leaves a lot of unanswered questions. And again, I felt as though my appetite for this story had not yet been satisfied, so I hunted for other endings, as the first dead end would still not let me continue. The fact that this ending has so much of Mizuki and we get to see her so strong, so confident and determined, makes the other branching storylines quite sad, as Mizuki is mentally broken and is for a period mute. It made me regret continuing to play. The following storyline that I did was the Iris route, and as you can imagine, it is for the most part revolving around Date and Iris's relationship developing. I didn't at all like Iris at this point, but this playthrough focuses so heavily on Iris that love for her was bludgeoned into my head. Iris is so intoxicatingly sweet that I suspected her of nefarious plots at every corner. I expected her to be the supervillain behind all of this. She is so lovely and coated in sugar that I thought surely I would die of a heart attack if I even indulged a little in her personality. She made me feel guilty, the guilt felt when eating a whole cake to yourself, and this arc force feeds you that cake. And I loved it. I loved every second of my time with Iris and her insane theories of shadow governments hunting her. This love the game makes you feel for Iris is necessary for the ending to give you the heart attack I previously mentioned. So let's talk about the bad ending, or the so-called annihilation ending. This may be the worst ending in the game in the sense that all of the characters you love die, hence its title of Annihilation, but it is also perhaps the most important storyline. Here is where we find out that the government official who we previously thought was the new Cyclops killer had a son, who used the sync machine, the same machine we have been using the whole game, to go into people's dreams to swap his brain with several members of our close acquaintances. Crazy, I know, but the realization that this person has not only been in the heads of most of our friends is not where the craziness ends, as we find out that we are in his body and our body is the body of a prisoner who was framed for the murders but actually had the brain of a Yakuza kingpin. Crazy, I know. There is really little I can do to explain that better. It is that much of a wild ride. I did not see it coming, and you need to play this game to even begin to understand the implications of how confusing that is. The good ending, also known as the resolution ending, is us using our memories of the previous timelines to get our body back and defeat the new Cyclops killer. All is well in the end, and the story finishes with a very terrible song that I grew to love. I felt a lot of emotions at this ending. At first, I thought this is ridiculous, and then I realized it was genius. I had spent the whole game unsure of if it even took itself seriously. Never mind if I took it seriously. But in the end, I couldn't stop playing. I enjoyed every last hidden and plain out there second this game has to offer. I wasn't ready to let this game go, but the best way to end a story is with a musical number. And it somehow forced a smile out of me. One last ridiculous goodbye to a game that made me consider so much. The Somnium Files in the world of visual novels. The Somnium Files, as previously stated, is in a genre of games known as visual novels, an interactive text-based video game usually accompanied by static, sprite-based illustrations. Though the style of illustrations often follows what you would expect from an anime, this is not always the case. To better flesh out my knowledge of the visual novel genre, I asked friends and the internet what sort of games I should play to really see what the genre had to offer. Hatoful Boyfriend is a visual novel that takes what is usually expected from the genre and twists it on its head. Instead of well-drawn sprites, all of the characters are depicted with pictures of birds. Because of this rather ridiculous artistic style, the game sets your expectations very low at the beginning and makes you think that it is some sort of joke game. Initially leaning heavily on the stereotype of visual novels being dating simulators, Hatoful Boyfriend eventually flowers into a story so emotionally dramatic it will make you cry over the PNG of a mourning dove. The general structure of the game is, as previously stated, what would be expected from a lot of visual novels, having to play through the game multiple times to unlock a true ending. Hatoful Boyfriend has 14 endings that involve the sometimes reciprocated romance of you and some birds. Though you have to play through largely the same game many times, seeing many repeated scenes, the adventure that remains buried deep in this treasure trove of personalities is well worth the dig, and your shovel will be the skip button. Hatoful Boyfriend made me understand two things about the visual novel genre. 1. You can rely on reliable and overused tactics to convince players into thinking that they are having a run-of-the-mill experience, only to thoroughly blow their minds later on. And 2. I really prefer how the Somnium Files handled the multiple timelines aspects of visual novels. Yes, both games require you to play through many endings to get the true ending. However, the Somnium Files, as I previously said, uses many storylines to lead to the true ending. Everything coming together in a big crescendo of all-consuming plot twists and brain magic. However, Hatoful Boyfriend makes you play through most of the same stuff over and over again. This by no means makes Hatoful Boyfriend a bad game. I highly recommend it if you want to dip your toes into visual novels. I felt that I wouldn't be able to stand by my statement that the Somnium Files is the only game to make time travel sort of work unless I played Steins Gate, a game famous for, well, time travel. In another world, at another time, I would have reviewed this game. Steins Gate deserves to be praised. It deserves the hype, and it deserves every bit of promotion it receives. This is the part of the script that I wrote last, as it took me quite a while to play through all of Steins Gate. After I finished the first ending, I just couldn't stop going. I played through every single ending this game had to offer. I found every hidden secret in the game. I devoured this thing. I enjoyed every morsel this story had to offer, and I highly, no, I demand you play this game. This is perhaps one of the best stories you will ever experience. Each ending is as impactful as the last, and it will stir emotions in your soul that you shall rarely feel in your outside life. The relationships I developed in this game will stay with me longer than any I have made in person. I sobbed my heart out at almost every chapter. I don't want to spoil Steins Gate, but it is so much better than Hatoful Boyfriend, leagues better than the Zero Escape games, and a universe better than the Somnium Files. I understand what you must be thinking. Why would I make a review on the Somnium Files if this game is so much better? And the answer to that is timing. I played the Somnium Files first, I enjoyed it first, and I thought it was such a good visual novel that I wanted others to hear of it, but there's also a second reason. That reason is that the Somnium Files is newer. Now, as I said before, you need to play Steins Gate. Age does not damage Steins Gate. No, Steins Gate has aged like the most flavourful of time-seasoned cast iron skillets, making every bite it provides you taste of love and enjoyment. But the Somnium Files is newer, and it needs supporting. This game has no fans, it has poor reviews far lower than what it deserves, and we need to support the games that need it because by God I want another Steins Gate. And we do not get another Steins Gate without proving that visual novels are profitable and loved, and to do that we need to support things that are not as good as Steins Gate. The Somnium Files is good, and if we show support there might be another monumental masterpiece, a perfect 10 out of 10 game like Steins Gate in our futures. We must laboriously carve a path for the future of this fantastic genre of video games, so that its legacy does not end, but instead grows, spreading like a civilization of storytelling perfection. Overall, the Somnium Files is a gem of a story lodged somewhere between a game and an experience. In the themes of cyberpunk, it felt as though I was experiencing the life of someone else and stealing their emotions. The game does everything to set your expectations in a myriad of drastically different directions, and yet whilst its motive seemed to be to distract you from the real story unfolding, I at no point felt tricked. I knew nothing of this game when I started. My expectations were high because of the developer Spike Chunsoft, and yet it leaped over those expectations by astronomical measures. Snuggled safely in a world too like our own, it uses futuristic technology to make us wonder of the possibilities, and then smashes those possibilities by simultaneously making Date a superhuman and a goofy pervert. This is something you owe not to yourself, but to the developers of this game to play. It is unique, it is an experience, and for God's sakes, it makes time travel sort of work. If that isn't high praise, I'm unsure of what is. This was Taylor, talking about a game. Goodbye.